Okay, perfect. All right.
You need to do that?
So,
Did you need to do that?
Yeah, I did it.
Why?
All right, so I've been tasked with ending the series on encounters with Jesus, no pressure or anything, and I decided to talk about being seen with a very specific story, which is Zacchaeus'. Not a lot of people talk about Zacchaeus because unlike most of the other encounters of Jesus that have miracles and works of wonder, this one's kind of like mundane, you know? Because it's just an invitation to dinner. And yet, it creates a radical transformation. Unlike all the other encounters that are physical transformations, this is a heart transformation. Now, an interesting thing about where Zacchaeus is placed in Luke's book, prior to his story, there are 4 parables that occur. The parable of the rich man, the parable of the tax collector, the parable of the blind man, and the parable of the children seeking to see Jesus. And when you look at these 2 stories side by side, you find that perhaps Luke put this story in there, Zacchaeus' story, because he's an embodiment of all 4 parables. He has this childlike faith as he runs to see Jesus because he heard about him. He is the rich man, but unlike the other rich men, he actually gives away half his wealth. He is the tax collector, and he humbles himself like the tax collector in the parable. And he is seen like the blind man. So let's read the passage. It's from Luke 19, 1 to 10. I don't have the words up there, so you'll just have to listen. Jesus entered Jericho and was crossing through. He's on his way to Jerusalem where Palm Sunday is. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector, and he wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your home today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He has gone to the guest of a sinner?" But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here now I give half my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus said this to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." So, basically, Jesus exalts this tax collector because he humbled himself. He's seen because of his faith, his childlike approach, because of his faith and his childlike approach, and he gives away his wealth. And the fact that he pays back 4 times, or the choice of saying 4 times rather than the traditional 7, links up to David, who, and his parable of the sheep. And David says, that person must pay back 4 times. And this was the story of Bathsheba. Just a little link, Old Testament to New Testament. But when you think of this story, right, you're like, not a lot really happens. I mean, Jesus basically invites himself. But why does this simple act create such a transformative effect? And for that, let's break down Zacchaeus. Because, we're all thinking, we're like, are you sure this guy? You want to go to this guy's house? You hear the crowd muttering? Short fry, the tax collector, the sinner, the cheat. Everybody's thinking this, and yet Jesus decides to ignore this and go to his house. So let's break down Zacchaeus. Let's learn a little bit about him, so we can better understand why this encounter makes such an impact. So from the passage, we can learn 3 or 4 pieces of information about Zacchaeus. Number 1, of course, he lives in Jericho. Number 2, he's a short guy. Number 3, he's the chief tax collector. Number 4, he's very, very wealthy. Now, based on that information and the context of the time, we can make some assumptions. 1, he was probably made fun of for being short. I mean, I think that's a universal problem. It still happens today. And though Zacchaeus was short, he was probably very, very clever. Because you don't become chief tax collector without being very smart. And you don't cheat a lot of people without being very smart. So and then of course, he has to be extremely wealthy. Because when you think about him giving 50% of his wealth away to the poor, plus paying back 4 times the amount he cheated, he's got to have a lot of money to do that. Okay, so more than we imagine. And I would say, if I were a betting man, I would bet that Zacchaeus basically cheated the problem. The people were making fun of him. So we know that tax collectors were despised by the Jewish people. And they were put in the same category as pagans. So why does Zacchaeus choose to become one? Growing up, I was one of the shortest kids in class. I was made fun of until 11th grade when I came back with a growth spurt and I was taller than most of them. And like Zacchaeus, because I was teaching with my size, we might not have a definitive answer to Zacchaeus' choice of path, but perhaps I can share some insight of being in similar shoes of what I might have thought if I was him. Perhaps he felt like he never fit in because of his short stature, because it might have affected the respect he was due. Nobody gave him respect because he was considered too small to matter. He probably didn't have many friends, maybe a little introverted. Maybe he felt powerless, and being a tax collector was one of the ways for him to gain power over his oppressors. Amassing wealth was probably a way for him to find comfort and compensation for his loss, a way for him to find belonging. If you think about it, his path was like, I need to belong, so if I gain enough power and if I gain enough wealth, then I will get some friends. That's what I imagine he was thinking. And so he goes on this path, but it doesn't really help him out. It probably has the opposite effect. So I want you guys to take a moment and pause and consider the many ways we ourselves do this in our own lives. What do we do to feel like we belong? What do we do to feel like we are seen? So we are seen. So we are heard. Is it a question of the way we pour our energy into the way we look? Maybe it is in the things we buy. Maybe you have to have the latest Porsche or the Land Rover or I don't know, whatever fancy car people drive these days. Or maybe it is your work. Your work then becomes your identity. And I know for myself, for many years, my work was my identity. And so any criticism of my work then felt like a criticism of me. So, if somebody insulted the work, that was a direct insult for me. And that did not create a great way to live, because it's easy then to get depressed or get lost because you feel underappreciated because your work isn't at the standard. It was only years later when I anchored my identity in Christ, he helped me realize your value is in who you are, not what you do. And so you have intrinsic value before you do anything, before you say anything, before any act you do. And realizing that makes a huge impact on how you then perceive the world. And if you think about the incidents in Dublin this past week, I think that was a cry to be seen, to be heard, because none of them were, that was not happening for them. I mean, probably not the best way to do it, but I feel like that was the intention behind it. So why does Zacchaeus want to see Jesus? I think he's realized that all the wealth in the world can't give him what he's looking for. He's seeking something more, a place to belong. And I think this is something we can all relate to. We all want to belong, right? And we don't always find that. And so we seek places to find belonging from. The next question then is, okay, we understand Zacchaeus' intentions. What about Jesus? You know? Why does he choose to take the actions he did? When we think about Jesus, he doesn't seem to care. Like he's willing to risk his reputation as a respected rabbi to go and sit with this sinner, right? In India, we have this term that most Indians follow their action by. It's called, there's a saying called "Log kya kahenge," which means what will people say. And so every action or everything you do is driven by that underlying question: what will people say? What will people think? And so that really prevents people from being themselves because they're hiding behind this facade. But Jesus doesn't do that. He doesn't care about the values we have created in our world. His own principles are counter to the world. Everything that Jesus does shows that his kingdom is counter to our expectations, and it turns our values upside down. So, in his upside down kingdom, we gain honor by serving. In his upside down kingdom, he asks us to forgive instead of gaining revenge. In his upside down kingdom, you gain great wealth by giving it all away. So Jesus does the unexpected. He chooses to dine with the one person most despised by the crowd, a tax collector, a sinner. Jesus takes this risk to his reputation to restore somebody else's reputation. He's breaking stereotypes and he's inviting a shift in thinking. And let me ask you this: how many times have we judged somebody by the way they look, or the job they do, or the money they have? You know, it's easy to say, oh, he's a rich guy, he doesn't know what it's like to have a tough life. Or to be like, you know, the thing over this weekend was, you know, any person of color was an immigrant, even though some of them might have been born here, lived here all their lives, and consider themselves Irish. But how many times do we judge other people by those thoughts? Zacchaeus had all the wealth in the world, but he had no meaning. His identity was tied to his job, and Jesus changed that with an encounter, with a very simple act, an invitation for people to see him. His choice to do this had huge significance both for Zacchaeus and for all of us, as it tells us several things. Number one, no one has sinned too much to be saved. So we all have a chance of redemption. This is Jesus' message to the world. Number 2, Jesus gives dignity and belonging to Zacchaeus. That simple act of seeing Zacchaeus for who he truly was, not what he did, transformed him to make the choice, a hard choice, to give away his wealth to the poor, to pay back anyone he cheated 4 times they would owe him. Now, this encounter, unlike the rich man, where Jesus asked him to give it all away, Jesus doesn't ask Zacchaeus to give away all his wealth. Zacchaeus chooses to give some of it away. So it's a question of it's not a question of whether he's wealthy or not. He's allowed to be wealthy. It's a question of the heart intention. What is more important to him? What is first in his heart? The wealth or the person of Jesus? And lastly, Jesus restores our relationship. By seeing and acknowledging Zacchaeus, Jesus restores him to the meaning of his name. Does anybody know the meaning of Zacchaeus? Zacchaeus in the Hebrew means pure. And it's interesting that it's a full circle story for him, because now Zacchaeus is restored to his namesake. That sinner life is pulled away by Jesus' choice to interact with him in that space. And he's given restoration, right relationship with Jesus, God. It's a reflection of our own choice to do so. But often when we look at these sort of encounters with Jesus and all the miracles, it's easy to dismiss ourselves because perhaps we can't do miracles yet. I say yet because I think we are all called to do miracles. Zacchaeus' encounter is a reminder that sometimes you don't need a miracle to impact a life. Sometimes all it takes is a simple act of kindness. An action to acknowledge and see someone for who they are. So be kind. Be the light. So as you go into this week, into your work, into your schools, wherever you might be, in your neighborhood, ask yourself, what small act of kindness can I do to help someone be seen? May God be with you and bless you as you go forward into the week. Thank you.